Power is largely defined by the ability to exclude. That means power of a necessity must have standards, rules, and regulations. It's got to have those who are allowed and those who are not allowed. In black circles, however, we've made a tradition of ignoring this reality. Instead of having a code that everyone is obligated and required to follow, we just say, let me do me and you do you. This is the antithesis of having a code. It is the antithesis of having power, and that's why we by and large don't have it. And that's why there's so many black people who are so resistant to it, who are so resistant to the imposition of a code, to an imposition of rules and regulations and standards. Black folks are so used to doing whatever they want to do around other black folks. Now, around white people or non-blacks, then, well, they're on their P's and Q's. They'll go ahead and adjust to those groups. This is not just a matter of they have the ability to get some small, minor crumbs, they hope, or just a pat on the head from these other groups. This comes down to an abject, blatant disdain and disrespect for blackness, even though that's what they allegedly are. So we have to understand that this problem goes way beyond merely thinking that they're going to get a pat on the head from some other group. It is not okay to disrespect us. And that disrespect that comes from within our ranks ought to be punished the most harshly. White power understands what it is that we're doing and what the eventual result will be if we're not stopped early, which is why you see them coming at us. It's just a fact that society, human society, hinges on critical masses, tipping points. When things reach a tipping point, they can't be stopped. Vietnam was over 50,000 American lives lost in a failed effort, all because the U.S. was terrified about a so-called domino effect. If they let too many countries fall to communism, then others would fall simply because. It becomes like a train you can't stop. So white power understands very well the danger in not curtailing adverse movements against white power before they gain too much steam. Now, what does this mean for us internally? What it means is that black, and when I'm talking about black, I'm talking about those of us who are the survivors of slavery in America, foundational blacks, whatever you want to call it. Those of us who came out of slavery, we have to make sure that black is a club. Because these other groups, these foreign-born blacks, these immigrant blacks, they don't like to be called black. They want to be called Nigerian, or they want to be called Jamaican or Haitian or whatever. I say we let them. Black should be a word that refers to those of us simply in the United States, those of us rooted in the United States, whose bloodline goes back to the plantations. Great. When we say black, we're talking about us. It's an exclusive term. I'm cool with that, and you should be cool with it too. But if black is going to be a club, then we have to treat it like one. Now, if black has value, that means you got to treat it like it. Power is not inclusive. Power is exclusive. Power is not defined by who is coming into your organization. It is defined by whether you have the ability to keep others out. An exclusive club is exclusive precisely because they put up barriers to entry, not barriers to exit. You see, white power likes the idea that black people in this country can fight for all sorts of policies and fight for all sorts of potential benefits, and then they put up the hand and say, well, black folks, y'all are not going to get any part of it. We'll let all of these non-black groups or even a few foreign blacks have what you guys fought for. See, that's how white power operates. Are you part of white power's club, which means you are white or you are one of their bootlicks? If an organization is one of consequence, one that wields power, then membership must be hard to get and easy to lose. Membership can't just be something you walk in and say, okay, where's my tangibles at? It don't work like that. You can't come up to some group and say, I'm going to partake of what you guys have fought for or amassed or accumulated or achieved simply because I walked in the door. That can't be the way it works. You have to be able to exercise some sort of sovereignty. Now, before we go any farther, let's make this clear. Foreign blacks, migrants, whatever you want to call them, I do not look at them and say that they are our enemies. Let's get that straight right from the jump. They are not our enemies and should not be regarded as such. but they are our competitors because they've chosen to be. And when you look at some of them, there are some of them who have chosen to be our enemies. That's just a fact. There's a large number, in fact, of these foreign-born or migrant blacks who have chosen to be our enemies. They show complete and thorough disrespect. They have no problem trying to figure out how they can use us in order to get themselves a quickie paycheck or get a quickie pat on the head from white power. They have no problem with that. They have no problem trying to use us to their benefit. And they disrespect and attack us all the day long. They do everything that they can to run us into the ground. Their attitude toward us is no better than some migrant who came from Southeast Asia or from south of the border. So there is a reality there, and we're not going to ignore it. Now, as far as the vast majority goes, they have not been embracing of us either. We have spent 100+ years spreading the word that as the collective children of Africa, wherever we find ourselves in the world, we have got to accept one another on the basis of the fact that our bloodline ultimately goes back to Africa. That's what we were trying to institute. That's what we were trying to bring about. They got the message. They understood what we were saying. And they said, we're not buying what you're selling. Far as they were concerned, nah, we consider ourselves to be better than you, and that's because we're trying to get in good with white power. We consider ourselves to be better than you because, well, you guys achieved things that the rest of the world has been forced to take notice of. Meanwhile, the Africans in Africa or the Africans in Jamaica or in South America haven't done anywhere near as much. And because of that, there's a lot of anger and jealousy and envy. And instead of them looking and saying, you know what, our problem is white supremacy, our problem is white power, instead they decided, our problem is you Agatas. Our problem is you barriers. Our problem is you Habishas. That's been what they've said. We've been trying to practice Team Black, and they've been trying to practice Team Igbo or Team Somalian or Team whatever. How the hell are we supposed to have any sort of alliance or brotherhood with those who have already made up their minds that that's not what they're looking for? Oh, it's starting to become a lot clearer why it is that white power has been so intractably entrenched in Africa and why they ain't budged 1 millimeter. It's starting to become very clear now, isn't it? The problem is that these foreign blacks have been practicing disdain for us, practicing disrespect for us, and they've been allowed to get away with it and benefit by doing so. And they have not faced any substantive pushback from us. We haven't pulled their coat on it. We haven't checked them on it. More importantly than that, we have not denied them the ability to be able to ride on our coattails and to be able to get some tangible benefits by pretending to be us, by using our achievement, by trying to hijack what we've done, and to hijack being one of us. They get to cloak themselves in being one of us while spitting in our faces. Our relationship, such as it is not what it should be. And the burden falls on them to change that. I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend as if both sides are equally to blame or that we're to blame at all. We are not. This is one of those few occasions where you've got one side who's totally wrong and one side who's totally right. And you better have your head on straight about which one is which. We have a lot of our brothers and sisters from beyond borders who happen to know what it is, where it's at, and what it's got to be. But we have to be honest. These foreign blacks who happen to be on the side of the angels, they're a minority within a minority, and they know it too. The exact same attitude of dissension and disunity and variance for variance sake and simply being contrary for the sake of being contrary, all of this bickering, backstabbing, and infighting, this is what's been crippling Africa for so long. And there's a lot of blacks who have migrated here who understand that. But they also understand that a large number of those migrant blacks happen to come from the very groups in Africa who have made their common cause with the European or made their common cause with the Arabs or made their common cause with whatever invader is showing up this week. And these are the guys who white power wants to bring in, because if these guys were effective in disrupting our internal politics in Africa, then they'll also be equally effective at disrupting our internal politics here in the U.S. This is the reason why we are making it very clear that unless your bloodline goes back to those plantations, Well, don't expect for us to be bending over backwards any longer trying to say that you're essentially one of us. Don't expect that to be happening anymore. In fact, before it's all over, as we begin to gain even more steam and even more influence, even your bloodline going back to the plantations won't be sufficient. This is the reason why I coined that phrase. You may have the bloodline, but do you have the bond? See, it's about more than whether or not you had a couple of ancestors who got caught up in the slavery experience in the US. Oh yeah, it's going there. Because you see, if you tell me that I have to accept you simply because your ancestry goes back to the plantations, that means I got to accept David Clark and Malcolm Nance too, and I'll be damned if I do that. So to the handful of black folks, the handful of black immigrants who didn't come out of American slavery, I would love nothing more than to be one big happy family, but not like this. What's required at this moment is to hit the reset button. It's to reset our relations with one another, to reset your understanding of us, to reset your expectations of us, and to reset how you interact with us. You better forget what you think you know about us. You better forget what you think you can do around us. You better forget what you've come to expect of what you'll be able to get away with when you're around us. And no, you're not going to be able to do we are all Africans. I mean, I've seen more than enough of that nonsense going on. The same folks who have nothing to do with foundational blacks, all of a sudden, now that they're seeing that we're starting to look at them and say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and build a nice little fence between us and you. All of a sudden, I don't know why I do not know why they are doing this at all. Are we not all Africans? No. According to you, we haven't all been. Oh, but now we're supposed to be. See, now all of a sudden, here comes the Pan-African talk. Now all of a sudden, here comes we're all the children of Africa talk. Well, you see, words aren't enough. I've always said that unity is not something that happens just when Rodney King is beaten half to death. Unity is not something that happens only when Trayvon Martin is murdered. Unity is not something that only happens when Jordan Russell Davis is murdered. Unity is not something that only happens when Sandra Bland or when Walter Scott or when Rakisha McBride or Rakia Boyd or Ayanna Jones is murdered. Unity is not something that only happens when Eric Garner is strangled to death. Unity is supposed to be 24/7. Unity is not merely something that's supposed to happen whenever one of us is killed and white power is scheming how to aid and abet the murderers. Unity is something that happens when we meet one another, when we greet one another, our dealings with one another, how we think about one another. This is what unity actually is. Unity is the living, breathing heartbeat and life's blood of what it is that we do, think, speak, say, and are as a result, as it relates to our group. And that's how it is. So when you got these foreign blacks, you can tell who the ones are who have been practicing the most disunity because they're the main ones trying to say, I do not understand where this is coming from. These are the main ones who have been eating off of our achievements, our accomplishments. They've been coasting to Easy Street on the path that we made and the bricks that we laid. And then they think they're going to come in and walk off with the goods. So you can tell who the ones are who have basically been getting by off of us for the longest time because they're the main ones. All of a sudden now they want to be talking that Pan-African unity stuff. Now they want to talk it now that we've walked away from the table. And for the family out there, you know, the ones who aren't hard-headed. When I tell you that there is value in getting up from the table and saying, forget it, when it comes to any sort of negotiation or any sort of dealings, the most powerful word you have at your disposal is no. Remember what I taught you, that if you want people to like you, just go ahead and say yes to everything. Oh, well, they're making sure that the Congressional Black Caucus is staffed with a bunch of black migrants. Well, we don't want people thinking that we don't want to be friends, so we'll go ahead and say we're cool with that. Oh, and they're driving black people out of these businesses and replacing them with a bunch of West African migrants, and we don't want anyone saying anything ill of us, so we're going to go ahead and cheer that too. You want to be liked by everyone, just go ahead and be a doormat. Say yes to everyone, and everybody will like you while they walk all over you. But if you want to be respected, then you better learn to start saying no. That's how you get respect, because when you say no, now people have to think before they deal with you. They got to think before they come walking up smiling in your face. They got to think before they do anything that might be adverse to your interest, because you've made it very clear where you stand. See, that's how you get respect. Respect means people got to think first as it relates to you. And this is new to a lot of folk, because we spent the better part of half a millennium, and the last 150 years in particular, conditioning everyone to think that they can just walk all over us, that we just sit here and we're going to just take this abuse and we're going to allow everybody to just get away with it. We've been letting people get away with it for so long, as far as they're concerned. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. You're trying to get serious? Psh, shut up. You guys don't mean it. Because that's the pattern that's been put in place. So we're going to have to prove to everyone that we are serious, that this is the new normal. We're going to have to prove that, because we've been spending so long proving that the opposite is true. And as the good book says, charity begins at home and then spreads abroad. Well, power also begins at home. Now, because white power rewarded all of these non-foundational blacks at our expense, this process of hitting the reset button is going to be a shock to the system. Oh, it's going to be really, really shocking, very unpleasant, to put it mildly. This adjustment is not going to be easy, because everybody's been used to having white supremacy give them some crumbs, and then they get to go ahead and scoop stuff off of our plate too. And what's happening is we're going to take that fork and that knife and put it through their hand when they start trying to scoop stuff off of our plate. The free lunch is over. They're going to be going to white supremacy's pretend to be black buffet, and they're going to find the damn buffet closed. And they're going to see us standing there saying we're the ones who closed it. And they'll be pointing to white mommy and white daddy going, "You must do something about these akatas. You must do something about these habishas. You must do something about these balias." That's what they're going to be. That's what you see happening right now. What's happening right now is these guys, and being disrespectful all the while, are saying, well, what the hell's the bee in their bonnet? All of this backside. This is self-hate. Yeah, see, it's not self-hate when these black migrants are attacking us and running us into the ground and claiming that, oh, well, you guys, you just don't want to work, or you just don't try very hard. The damned insult. We're the ones who established the very historically black colleges and universities that they want to get into. We're the ones who kicked open the doors to the white universities and colleges that they keep getting into. We're the ones who kicked open the employment opportunities that they've been allowed to take advantage of. And then these same people say that we don't want to work very hard. We're the only ones who do work. Everybody else just shows up with a freaking handout, and white supremacy puts something in it. We're the only ones who know what it means to get some sweat on our brow. That's just the fact. That's the reality. We work, everybody else just shows up. And what's happening is they're scared that the free ride's about to be over. They should be worried, because white power has been using them for a political counter lever against us. And once we decide that we're short-circuiting that little con, then what does white power need these black migrants for? The entire idea was to politically doze us off into a false sense of security that, well, there's a few blacks making it, and maybe that means we're making progress. And we point and say, nah, this is a con. This is nothing more than some white ethno-political economic theater, and we understand the con that's going on. Now white power's like, well, they're not going to sit on their hands while we exclude them and marginalize them into oblivion any longer. So what the hell do we need these damn migrants for? And that's what they're worried about, because Donald Trump, he ain't just been cracking down on Latinos. Yeah, these African migrants, they've been getting that business too from Donald Trump. And what's also going to start happening is these white corporations are going to look and say, okay, we're sick and tired of pretending as if we didn't mind having you migrant blacks around. We didn't like you guys any better than them. You clearly have failed in your mission, so we don't need you around. White power will begin breaking its tools. Now, let me go ahead and give you a glimpse of the future and tell you what's going to occur when white power begins breaking its tools in earnest and making a show of it. Because they're going to want to do it publicly and make a show of it, so that a lot of those other migrant blacks who were thinking that that the white supremacy, the white power buffet was still open. White power is going to put them on notice that no, the buffet's closed. What few crumbs you thought you were going to get, you can stop showing up for it. This is how white power puts its tools on notice, by making some high-profile examples. Now, when white power makes it very clear to these black migrants that it's breaking their tools, which means to break them, we're not going to do anything. And you're going to claim that we're the bad guys. Oh, that's when all of that phony baloney, fake as hell, black unity talk from these migrant blacks is going to kick into high gear. That's when it's really going to kick into high gear. When white power starts going in on them and we don't do anything about it. We don't take up for them. Ain't nobody holding up any candles. Ain't going to be no marches. Ain't going to be none of that. It's going to be just at best, tisk tisk. And that's it. We're going to go on about our business, which is the business of empowering ourselves. You're going to go ahead and claim that we're the bad guys, and that's fine. There's going to be all sorts of pathetic, feeble attempts at shaming language or attempts to try to figure out how to get some phony sympathy from us. Yeah, well, don't blame us and don't come to us. Go to the immigrant blacks who white power installed in positions of alleged power. You know who those immigrant blacks are in the Congressional Black Caucus, or rather the Immigrant Black Caucus. That was my video essay before last. I went ahead and gave you their names. You already know who they are. Go to Joy Reid and tell her to go ahead and speak for you, except she's not going to, because Joy Reid is every bit as much a bootlick as the rest of those clowns in the Immigrant Black Caucus. She understands exactly the purpose that she serves for white supremacy. She knows it. And you know it too. You've been playing the game of we will be the silent accomplices of white supremacy. Well, you're going to be silent as it relates to checking white power. When it comes to opposing white power, you're going to be totally silent. But when it comes to going against foundational blacks, all of a sudden you're going to be very loud and very outspoken about that. So you'll be able to go to the Roly-Poly Martins for all the good it does you. And you'll be able to go to the Angela Ryes with lettuce and tomato on the side. And you'll be able to go to the rest of these immigrant blacks. Go to the ones that work for these corporations and see how much good it does you. Forget about seeing if they help you. Just see if they'll even return your phone calls. See if they lift a finger for you. Right now, you are not suited for us to forge an alliance with you. Because right now, migrant blacks, foreign blacks, whether you reside in Africa or here in the U.S. or anywhere else, if you're one of the foreign-born blacks or a descendant thereof, you're overrun with turncoats and cutthroats, and you know this. We're not ready to call ourselves allying with you either, because we suffer from a similar problem. And we won't waste time trying to figure out who's real and who's phony. It'll just be a lot easier and a lot better for us to just start from scratch. So that's what we're going to do. That's what you see happening here. Oh, you're circling the wagons. Damn right, because we've been under relentless attack. And from many people who look like us and who now the white power is starting to knuckle up on them. Now the white power's starting to make things a little bit hot for them and starting to withdraw some of the goodies and bringing them in for a little bit of abuse. Now, all of a sudden, these same folks who were proud of running us into the ground, now all of a sudden it's, we are all Africans. Whatever we are all Africans. Oh, now we are. Now there's no difference between us. Now there's not. No, you made it very clear that there is a difference. And we're going to handcuff you to your words. You were the ones who slapped away the hand of brotherhood, not us. We were not giving you a second chance. We were giving you your last chance. And the chance is over. We're going to focus on empowering ourselves. And you know what? You migrant blacks, you immigrant blacks, you should focus on empowering yourselves too. Because we're not going to be doing it. And white power has already shown they're not going to be doing anything for you anymore either. Now, that's what I have to say regarding foreign-born blacks, migrant blacks, immigrant blacks. That's what I have to say regarding them. But this evening's address is not in regards to them. It's in regard to those of us whose bloodline goes back to the killing fields of the American South, back to the plantations. Those who don't merely have the bloodline, but who also have the bond. In the mafia, you basically have two types of individuals. You got made men and you got associates. If you ever saw the movie Goodfellas, Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, he was a mob associate, but he could never be a made man. And the reason for that being he was Irish, not Italian. But in the mafia, merely being Italian isn't enough. You have to be able to trace your roots. You got to be able to trace your bloodline back to Sicily. Sicily happens to be the large island-like piece of land at the very tip of the Italian boot. You know how Italy is shaped like a boot? And at the very tip of it, you've got Sicily. Well, a lot of the northern Italians who tend to be lighter skinned and their ancestry largely has more to do with Switzerland, Austria, you know, those Germanic type countries than the southern Italians. They like the idea of basically Italy is kicking Sicily out because there's historical reasons for that. This disdain on the part of the northern Italians for the southern Italians. That's a reality, and that's part of the reason why the mafia insisted that your bloodline's got to go back to Sicily because of that political reality of how things are on the Italian mainland. Now, for the hardheads out there who like to argue against every lesson that's taught, nobody's saying that we need to copy the Italian mafia. I'm simply pointing out to you how other groups who exercise power, there do happen to be some principles that would be of benefit no matter who you are. And there's a reason why some organizations are effective and why ours up until now has not been. See, the Italian mafia understands it's not just about the bloodline. It's also about the bond, too. You got to have both. There's a schism between Northern Italians and Southern Italians, and that bond that the Sicilians have, it's more than just Northern Italians being lighter skinned while Southern Italians are darker. What the difference is that the Sicilians came out of a common experience. For the mob, having Italian blood isn't enough. They want to know if you came from the same common experience as they did. See where this is going? The mafia per se does not exactly use those words, but they don't have to. Their actions speak far louder than their words. Now, mob associates like Henry Hill, they're able to hang out with the made men after hours, or they'll be occasionally trusted with certain routine tasks for the mafia, but the mob keeps associates at a distance. No matter how much they may personally like a mob associate, no matter how trusted a Henry Hill may be, it's because Henry Hill, the mob associates, they don't have the bloodline and their bond is questionable at best. And the mafia was very careful as to how they handled the introductions. For example, let's say you have a made man and he brings his associate buddy to a party where there's a lot of mafioso around. When the other made men see this stranger, they're going to ask the made man, hey, who brought him? Is this a friend of yours? That's the phrase that they like to use in the mafia. They'll walk up to this made man and they'll see the stranger and they'll say, is he a friend of yours? If the made man says he's a friend of mine, that means he's an associate, but not a made man, because he said he's a friend of mine. But on the other hand, if the made man says he's a friend of ours, that means he's a made man. But the stranger, he can't make the introduction himself. He's got to get somebody from that mafia crew to do the introduction instead. You just see, the mafia understands how it works. You can't just go running up into a mob joint and start declaring yourself to be one of them. You can't just declare yourself a made man. Only someone who the family knows as one of theirs, somebody with the bloodline and the bond, is authorized to do that. You cannot bestow legitimacy upon yourself. The mafia gets that, and they don't. And by the way, when it comes to introductions, they don't do the introductions lightly. See how that works? You want to know why it is that some of y'all are raising all this hell about the Harriet Tubman movie, and you're right to do so. But you want to know why it is that this mess is going on? Because we've allowed, for the last 150 years, and for the last 50 years in particular, we've allowed everybody to claim to be one of us. To the point now where, as far as they're concerned, hell, I'm just going to walk in and say I'm one of you. Why are you African Americans getting upset? Why, we are one of you. We are one of you. Whoa. You better back up with all that. See, the mob gets it right. You go calling yourself claiming to be a made man, the mob's going to do a background check. They're going to check you out. Even the famed FBI agent Joe Pistone, who became famous as the undercover mob infiltrator Donnie Brasco, he didn't just walk up to the mob and say he's a made man. He came to them as an associate. See, the background checks for associates aren't as thorough as the ones for made men, so this gave Pistone, or rather Brasco, the chance to build up his resume with the mob from the day that they met him instead of having to build a history that they could actually research. This is why you've seen this effort on the part of the new voices of black media to start giving background on these black bootlicks, from the black puppets in the white media to the immigrant black caucus. We're checking people's background, just checking their papers. That's what we're doing. We're checking their papers. We're not taking these fools' word for it. And if the white media were the ones who presented them to us, then we call them agents and move on. See, we don't allow just anyone to introduce you to foundational black society. That's the reason why we keep saying black first. Your introduction cannot come to us through the white media. In fact, if the white media is the one who presented you to us, that means that you are a certified, bona fide, dyed-in-the-wool white supremacist agent. White power is never going to give a platform or exposure or publicity to someone who's working against the interest of white power. That's why the white media exists. It's there to promote the interest of white power, not ours. So when we see white power trying to establish you by putting your name out there, they're going to try to make you famous, try to make you prominent. We're like, okay, so this is the next white supremacist tool that's being put in front of us. And when people keep trying these stunts, we got to make sure that there happens to be a penalty for it. We have to take care of our own internal security. I've spoken to you about black men establishing their own intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities. Now you understand why. And finding out where these agents are coming from enables us to quickly separate the real from the phony. We have a right and a responsibility to vet these would-be spokespeople for you and me. We didn't choose these people. They didn't come from the grassroots. They don't talk like us. They've never associated with us. They don't stand up for our interests, and that's because they didn't come from us. And just that one thing alone, checking out the backstory on these people who call themselves running up to us and they're going to bestow legitimacy on themselves, that reveals a lot just because we ask a few questions about, hey, where you come from? Who's your people? Who sent you? We need to see your papers. See, this is what white power has feared, that we would begin excluding people because that's how power works. You see, powerless people do not and cannot exclude anyone. Just any old body can run up in your spot if you've got no power. Any old body can just walk up, push you aside and say, whatever you were going to give him, it's for me. Or they can just take what they want from you. That's what happens when you're powerless. You have no voice. You have no force. You can't do anything. This is why you see so many white people demanding that the U.S. border be closed. Sovereignty means that you control what goes on inside of your boundaries. Whatever area you have designated as yours, what you say goes inside those boundaries. That's sovereignty. But if you can't even keep people out of what's your domain, then you're a liar when you claim it's your domain. See, white people understand that reality. White people, they don't believe that anything that they own is community property. All of this nonsense about they should be able to do black music and they should be able to do black dance and all the rest of it, and they're not culture vultures, because aren't we all Americans? Geez, sounds kind of like those foreign blacks now, don't it? Where do you think they got that BS talking point from? They got it from white people. Bill Maher tried that crap on his show. Yeah, see, we're all supposed to be one big, happy, dysfunctional American family when it comes to them benefiting from what we've done and them trying to find ways to reach success off of our genius and off of our effort and off of our achievement and innovation. Then all of a sudden, well, it's not a crime while we're all one big, happy family. Yeah, but when it comes time to share the power, when it comes time for us to say, aren't we all just one big, happy family? So we're going to be sharing some of that power too, some of that. We're going to be sharing some of them tangibles too. Then all of a sudden, you niggers want a free ride, and well, we'll have to get back to you on that, buddy. Then that's all of a sudden what it becomes. So you see, those of us who are on Team Black First, We're not the only ones who are demanding the institution of a code of conduct and requiring that there be real consequences for getting off code. The mafia has a code of its own, omerta. It's the code of silence that prevents the informing on other people for the state, because the state wasn't on the side of the Sicilian people. Or at the very least, the Italian government wasn't on the side of the Gabellatos. Oh, you don't know who the Gabellatos are? Well, let me go ahead and give you a little bit of background on them. See, Sicily had had a number of foreign invaders. Sicily and Italy in general, but Sicily in particular, had been conquered and oppressed and horrendously abused by a number of foreign invaders. And what happened was a lot of these invaders, they would set up some of the turncoat bootlick Italians up as being their henchmen. And when these invaders eventually withdrew or were overthrown or their grip on power eventually crumbled, what happened was these bootlick Italians who had collaborated with these invaders, they essentially declared themselves noblemen and they basically became an ersatz aristocracy. Well, what happened was these aristocrats, they eventually wanted to go run off to Rome, which was on the Italian mainland, or they wanted to run off to some other portion. Perhaps they run off to Palermo, which is in the northern part of Sicily, of the island of Sicily. They wanted to go to other places where they could be where the good life was, places that were much more industrialized and better developed and had larger populations, which also meant more opportunity for profit. So these would have mostly been rural aristocrats. They wanted someone to basically safeguard and look after their rural land and their rural holdings while they went off to go party off in Palermo or in Rome. And what happened was the Gabellatos were the ones who basically fulfilled this role. Many of them were soldiers, though a lot of them were bandits, but they basically were mostly a bunch of peasants who were used to and willing to use violence for their aristocratic patrons. And the Italian government was never any help, so the people of Sicily soon decided that when it came to their own affairs, the Italian government was going to be illegitimate. And while the people lacked the power to change the government, they decided as a group that they would stop cooperating with it. They would handle their disputes themselves. And who was it who led the charge on that particular effort? The Gabellatos did. The Gabellatos, very soon, they were using the methods of violence not merely in order to keep would-be thieves from stealing what their aristocratic patrons had or to keep people from squatting on their aristocratic patrons' land. But soon they decided, well, hell, we've been running things a lot longer than these aristocrats have, and we're the actual teeth. We're the ones who put the force behind these barons' pathetic little would-be rules, so why the hell are we taking orders from these bastards? See, power isn't given, it's taken. The Gabellatos understood that. So what do you think happened? What happened was, first order of business, they put the aristocrats on notice. You're not in charge here anymore. And in the event that there is a disagreement, in the event that there's some sort of difference of opinion, you go ahead and bring your few soft, pudgy, fat little would-be henchmen, and we got our lean and mean death machine down here, and we'll see which one of us is still standing. And after that, that's who the new aristocrat's going to be. Well, those aristocrats didn't want that smoke. So a lot of them just said, you can either buy me out or what have you, and that's eventually what happened. Well, many of the Gabellatos wound up eventually fighting for turf amongst themselves. What was happening was power was consolidating itself. But in the process, the Gabellatos were also establishing themselves as the real authority. See, the corrupt Italian government spent more time abusing the citizens than it did serving them. So what happened was the people started going to the Gabellatos in order to settle their disputes. At the very least, with the Gabellatos, you knew what you were going to get. Yeah, they were corrupt. They were to an extent overbearing. And sure, these guys were violent, but at the very least, you knew where you stood. You knew what to expect. There were rules, and the Gabellatos actually followed their own rules, something the Italian government didn't do. Now, what needs to be mentioned is the reason that the peasants were now free to handle the disputes themselves was because there was no fear of the authorities getting involved. Tell me something, why is it that black folks don't flex on these white supremacists morning, noon, and night? It's not because we don't have the strength to do it. And it's not because we fear going to prison or we fear any sort of punishment that white power tries to dole out. Hell, we sit here and comply with it. So why is it that we do not ride on these white supremacists? It's because they have an organized, violent force to attack us, and we do not have an organization to protect us. We have not organized ourselves. That's the only difference. You organize yourself, and white power is going to have to come to terms with that whether they want to or not. See, the Gabalottos were in charge. They took over their parts of Sicily. So whenever somebody was wronged, whenever something was done wrong against you in Sicily, the peasants had a free hand to handle it themselves. That's what happened because there was no outside meddling by the corrupt and ineffective Italian authorities. That's where omerta came in, the code of silence. Basically, the word omerta, by the way, means manhood. That's what it means. What it means is something's done wrong against you, you got to handle that. Now, what happens if you got somebody who's not able to handle a particular wrong that was done against them? Then what happens is you got to go to someone else. You do have the ability to find some patron or some third party who would be willing to get justice for you on your behalf. If you ever saw the movie The Godfather, you understand how that works because the Gabalottos, they would often be appealed to by peasants who didn't have money or didn't have young men who they could have to go ahead and kick some butt on their behalfs. If you were one of those people who didn't really have those kind of means, didn't have those connections, didn't have the ability to handle things yourself, you could get a third party to do it. And the Gabalottos were often the ones who the people would go to settle those disputes. And if you ever saw the movie The Godfather, you understand how that process of the Gabalottos, who were basically the founders of the mafia, you understand how that process evolved. At the beginning of the Godfather movie, you had that man who said that his daughter had been outraged. That meant that she was raped. And that the man who did it was walking around free as a bird and nobody was doing anything about it. And he went to Don Corleone and said, "I need justice." Now, what was Don Corleone's response? It was not, "Well, if your daughter was raped, well, of a necessity, I gotta go handle that." He was like, "Whoa, you're asking me to basically embroil myself in a dispute that I have no part in. You're asking me to basically make an enemy, is what you're asking me to do, with a man who I do not know. And you don't even call me Godfather." That's what the Gabalottos would do. When you came to them for a favor, you could get the favor. But the thing about it was, and I'm not saying that we should institute this, I'm just explaining to you how the Gabalottos worked. What they made it clear was, now that you come to me for this favor, I'm going to be expecting loyalty, fealty, and service in return. Now, what they were doing was corrupt and wrong. Mainly because they were basically trying to make it where if you do somebody a good turn, well, now you're trying to figure out, how do I own this person? Now that we do not do, but the basic principle of that there are standards in this group, and if you think you can walk over a member of the group, you've violated the rules, and the group's going to come down on you, that I do favor because that's the way it's supposed to be done. There's a code of conduct. You can't have it where some renegade or some scumbag thinks that they're going to pull a dirtbag move and that there's not going to be any consequences. They got to understand, you cross that line, the whole damn group's coming after you and they'll tear you down. You see, the Gabalottos controlled the land. And that's the reason why the people basically had to submit to the civil rule of the Gabalottos. That's part of the reason why the Gabalottos were able to, that's a large part of why they were able to consolidate their power. They controlled who ate and who didn't eat. They controlled that land. They controlled the levers of power. There was a code of conduct and it was strictly enforced. And when you went off code, they dealt with you. See, the code in Sicily didn't come from the Italian government. It didn't come from the aristocrats who used to control the island. It came from the grassroots, be they ever so crumble. Now, because some black folks I know are unable to walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, and some want to argue not because they think, not because they actually got a point, but because they want attention, I'm going to emphasize something. As with my analysis of the origins of the Israeli Mossad, as with my refusal to jump on the Attack R. Kelly bandwagon. By the way, you know they're making another documentary about him, right? You do know that, right? See, they ain't made documentary one about Jeffrey Epstein, but they're sitting here starting a doggone documentary series about R. Kelly, just so you know. Whenever you see me speaking out about Israel's Mossad or R. Kelly or Bill Cosby, it's not an endorsement of them, okay? And I am not endorsing the Italian mafia. I am not saying we should pattern ourselves after the Gabellatos. I'm not praising them. I'm not saying we should copy them. They were Europeans after all, and they were only out for themselves. There's a reason the mafia never progressed beyond the point of being street thugs who shook down businesses. There's a reason why the mafia never evolved beyond that. The only mafioso who actually came close to it was Paul Castellano, and he got knocked off by John Gotti, an ignorant street thug who had no big plans for the mafia, and who only concerned himself with getting more kickbacks from the men who brought him money. And in the end, he wound up not merely bringing himself down, but by bringing a big part of the American mafia down, because he was not concerned about the group, he was concerned about himself. No, I'm not saying pattern ourselves after the mafia, but I am saying that there's something to be learned from the way that these guys carried out how they dealt with people, but also who qualified to be one of them. Even a group that's corrupt as hell, even a group that doesn't have what it takes to make it for the long haul, they'll still outperform us if they're doing certain basic things right. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Black empowerment, black first, is not a street gang. It's not a hustle, and it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I cite examples like the formation of the Mossad and the Mafia because in both those organizations, you can identify things that worked and things that did not work. More than that, these are some of the opponents that we're up against. I already showed you about the Israeli Lobby USA. You had members of the Israeli government, the Israeli military, which, by the way, is what the Mossad is, their military intelligence. They're not a domestic or civil intelligence organization. The Mossad is army intelligence. And you had that woman, she's like an Israeli colonel or brigadier general or whatever, talking about the biggest problem that Israel faces happens to be young black people in the United States. See, that's the reason why I like to know about the freaking Israeli Mossad, because I understand what the hell I'm up against. I understand how sophisticated our enemies are and that these guys are targeting us, so I prefer to know something about the people who are at war with me. Most black people turn up their noses at the idea of actually learning about our enemies. Gee, I can't understand why our enemies have been running roughshod over us. I mean, just because we don't know the first damn thing about them, it doesn't make sense that they're still able to just trot over us morning, noon, and night. See how willfully ignorant black people like to be? A lot of black folks are dumb as hell and they like to be dumb. Well, you can't be dumb and black first. You can't be willingly ignorant and black first. The two contradict each other. Sun Tzu said you have to know your enemy and you got to know yourself if you want to win a war. If you only know your enemy or if you only know yourself, then the best you can hope for is to lose 50% of the time. That's the best you can hope for. But Sun Tzu also said that if you don't know your enemy and you don't know yourself, then you're going to lose every single battle every single time. Well, thanks to the European, we've been robbed of our language, our history, our mores, folkways, cultures, and a lot of you robbed of your minds and your common sense. So we don't know ourselves. And most of us think that we're too good to have to learn about our enemies, so we don't know our enemies either. No wonder we've had to take so many L's. Well, you can't be around me if you're one of these fools who thinks I don't need to know about my enemy. Your enemy knows about you. He never misses an opportunity to try to figure out what he can learn about you and benefit from you from. That's why, as Jason Black beautifully put it, everybody benefits from knowing us except us, because they know us and we don't know ourselves. It pays to understand what makes for institutional strength, why certain organizations succeed and others fail. It pays to know what makes for institutional weakness too. Why do certain organizations stand the test of time while others wither and die almost immediately? This is why the mafia was so difficult for the government to infiltrate, and why it was so easy to infiltrate the Black Panthers and SNCC and practically every other black organization. The mafia understands that power is not inclusive, it is exclusive. See, the new voices of black media, part of the reason why we've been effective is because we've made it where infiltrators haven't been able to insinuate themselves. That's the reason why we tell you that we don't want you just listening to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who comes along and tries to claim to be one of us. These clowns who the white media presents and they try to appropriate some of our verbiage. That's why we call them out and come down on them hard as hell. It is not a victimless crime when white power presents some fool who you never heard of, don't know, and haven't vetted, this person who you don't know them from a can of paint, and yet here they are calling themselves, I'm going to say white supremacy, and I'm going to say black empowerment, and I'm going to say the word economics once or twice, and then I'm going to say black people should get behind me. They know a going concern when they see one. They know that we're a threat to white supremacy, so they're trying to appropriate our position. And what's happening is we are defending our position. We're not allowing ourselves to be infiltrated. See, this is how it works when you have a group that doesn't allow every Tom, Dick, and Harry to claim to be one of them. We, as foundational blacks, we let everybody claim to be one of us. They can disrespect us all the day long and then still turn around and claim to be one of us. We allow everyone, even white people, to lay claim to our history and the unique significance that we have had to the world. This distorts our place in the world and it undermines who we are. This is what it means to disrupt and to derange our internal politics. Everything that's ours is community property. Everyone gets to lay claim to all the things that we've done, and not once do they even mention us. So you better get comfortable with the idea of power being exclusive and telling people to hit the bricks and showing them the door. And when they decide, no, we are all brothers in the struggle, grab that bastard by the scruff of the neck and toss his ass out. But see, you only think like that when you believe you've got something valuable that must be defended and must be protected, and you understand you got something that other people covet and are trying to take. How much value do we assign to being foundational blacks? Having the bloodline and the bond. How important is that to us? How important is our culture to us? We have tons of value. God knows everybody else have made fortunes off of us. Before, during, and especially after chattel slavery. We are the biggest engine of wealth creation in human history and the most vibrant and influential culture that has ever existed. And all this in our most degraded state. So imagine how powerful we can be when we got some real tangibles at our disposal. When we start acting like a club and not acting like some sort of county fair. But what would we do with those tangibles, huh? Do we build bastions of black empowerment? Do we repeat the mistakes of yesteryear and try to integrate some white neighborhoods instead? If you think something is valuable, then you have to be able and willing to protect it. Taking back our culture and running out the white supremacist funded and influenced enemies within it, it's going to be difficult. And the biggest difficulty won't even come from the white supremacists themselves. It's going to come from black people who will not like that we're requiring them to dump some bad habits. They've been so used to us keeping them afloat. When we start cutting the dead weight loose and leaving them behind, building enclaves where our value system, our code of conduct is ruthlessly enforced, most black folks, and I'm talking about foundational blacks here, they're not going to like it. Because a lot of them are chasing interracial sexual access. A lot of them are still pining away for a pat on the head from white power. A lot of them have a very warped and juvenile idea of what constitutes black brotherhood, so they're still going to be trying to resuscitate the long dead corpse of Pan-Africanism. That's what a lot of them are going to be on. And they're going to be looking at what we're doing as it grows in size and influence. And they're going to be trying to figure out how do they stop that. Because as far as they're concerned, well, we need to go back to the old thing. Yeah, the thing that ain't worked. Well, I could care less if they change their minds because you don't have to like the code of conduct, but you're damn sure going to do it. This is why we didn't waste any time trying to figure out how do we get some black celebrities to be our patrons. We told you about those black celebrities. These guys are on team white supremacy. And what you've seen is we didn't have to change our message. They had to change theirs. These black celebrities, they only got what they got because they use black people as their foundational support. They use foundational blacks as their economic foundation. And then they walk away from us and spit on us afterwards. So I told you that you guys are the source for the LeBron James and the rest of these fakers, frauds, and phonies. I told you that you're the source. I'm not interested in going to somebody who's been leeching and parasiting off of us. I want to go to the source. That's you. And you see what the results have been. The power has always been in your hands. The only problem has been aggregating that power. Power is a serious game, family. It's the most serious game on earth for the highest stakes. So far, we've had the game all wrong, though. It's time to change that. Power is the ability to define yourself and those around you in such a way that your definition becomes theirs. Well, it's only been the last 12 years or so that we've begun to start reaching that message, sending that message out to the masses and reaching the black family here at home with that message. It's only been the last 12 years that this message has begun to be pushed and promoted. Because up until now, we allowed white power to foist a definition of black on us that served their interests. We were not coming up with our own definition. We let white power do that instead, and we were abiding by it. This is how you wind up with all of these people who brag about their octoroon and their quadroon roots, and you got these people whose skin is a little bit lighter than the average, and as far as they're concerned, they're trying to lord that over us as if somehow that makes them superior to or better than, bragging about their white parentage. This is the reason why it's not a victimless crime when you got black people, black women in particular, who will be out there saying, well, I've got some Swiss in me, and I've also got a little German, and I got some Filipino, and everything except for black. That is not a victimless crime when you got people bragging about any sort of slave master or any sort of white guy with an itchy crotch who happened to have dipped himself into their family bloodline. That's not a victimless crime when you got people bragging about that. What they're doing is they're making it clear the only part of their heritage, the only part of their ancestry that they're proud of is the white part. The black part, well, I try not to think about that. That's the attitude that they're having. That's blatant disrespect. White power sees this self-hate and they capitalize on it. You see, white supremacy adheres to an ultra-strict standard of racial purity. So when some white guy goes getting frisky with Sally Hemings, or whenever some white woman decides that she's going to throw open her legs for some black male who doesn't know better, then white power makes our community into a dumping ground for these people who they cast off. They're not making any room for these octoroons and these quadroons. They're not trying to say, oh, these guys are white. The hell they are. White power looks and says, no, we don't want them up. You're going to be part of the black community. We're going to declare you black. Well, what about the foundational blacks? Are they going to accept them? Well, it doesn't matter what they say. We say these people are black. And these people, these individuals, they've got no loyalty to us, so the bond is not there. The bloodline is highly diluted. And these people desperately wish to be part of white society, and they spread that madness among us. And white power sees them as useful. So white power's like, you know what? We're going to declare these guys black. And we're going to cause some real havoc by saying, well, you got these black people who we're going to give a couple of minor crumbs to. And why? We might even let you come to one of our social clubs, but you better leave in 30 minutes or less. And because of that, we're going to say, see, these are black folks who are making it. That's what they've used these high yellows and these octoroons and quadroons for. They've used them because black people are a terminally aspirational people. Or rather, we've devolved into that because that's not what people who have higher order thinking skills do. Higher order thinking skills are not aspirational. You don't live in your aspirations. But black folks have done that largely because we've been reduced to that, and white power has played on that. And here we are trying to make some sort of coherence and order out of what is intentional insanity that white power saddled us with. We eventually gave up on getting power for ourselves, so we became this aspirational, dysfunctional mass. We stopped fighting for our own power, and we made it clear that we would just be willing to settle for trying to live vicariously through this or that black person who had made it. Problem is, white power had the ability to pick and choose who makes it and who don't. So you get to have some black person who made it, and then that black person turns around and spits in our faces. And we're told that these are our spokespeople because white power puts them on TV and asks them questions and says, why do black people say that? Why do black people say that? These clowns have no legitimacy. They have absolutely no right to speak for us. And as a group, we had not called it out. But then again, how can we be expected to call out LeBron James when we don't call out the people who live in the very neighborhoods where we live? Why build anything for our children? Why fight for our children when we gave up on them a long time ago? So we retreated to idolizing black entertainers, black singers, black athletes, actors, and comedians. The buffoons of white media became our role models and even our icons because white power said they were. People who white power elevated to prominence and who would always be destroyed in the end, but we didn't care. We wanted to hear that Eddie Murphy was the highest paid star in Hollywood. We wanted to hear that a black man was made CEO of this or that Fortune 500 company. We wanted to hear that Jay-Z is a billionaire, allegedly. Black faces in high places. That was the battle cry of the black baby boomers. It was a call for pure tokenism. They were telegraphing and broadcasting to the world, you ain't got to make up for the greatest crime in human history. We don't need group economics. What we want is something to make us feel better about our sorry lot in life. And that's what white power did because we threw the door open for it. You're telling white power that you would stop trying to bring down white supremacy if they give you a couple of token Negroes in this or that high profile position. Not that they'll have any power or desire to do anything for black folks. Malcolm warned that tokenism was a trap, but this was what black people were openly calling for from the 50s all the way up into the 80s, actually beyond that. Because the black puppet leaders who white power planted among us were misleading us in that direction. That's the reason why I ride so hard on these black bootlicks who the white media keeps putting out there. That's why I can't stand Big Bird and Joy Reid and Roly Poly. That's why I go in on the Charlemagne the frauds. Because these are the people who white supremacy has used to instill generations of dysfunctional thought and practice among us. And this made it child's play to manipulate us. This is how you came to have black people weeping with joy because Barack Obama became president. Black people were not thinking of politics as a business transaction. They were thinking about it as some sort of feel-good ceremony. So white supremacy went ahead and let you feel good and then started killing your kids in the streets. White power declared that this biracial child of a foreign father and a white mother was the culmination of all of our hopes and dreams. Well, you know, my dream is black empowerment. One black man in the White House don't cut it. I don't dream about overlooking white supremacy. I dream of destroying it. Barack Obama did not. White power placed these hand-picked migrants among us to manufacture the lie that racism's been put behind us. A black fool who will not tell the truth, like we will. A black puppet who just showed up yesterday, but whose mission is to impersonate us. White people know that it's a con, but it's a comforting con. And the reason they push it so hard is because they hope that we'll sit on our hands while we're strangled for resources, and hopefully we won't get out of pocket because there's some mealy-mouthed black migrant on TV who refuses to say the things we say, but who is constantly name-dropping our ancestors and our icons and our achievers and constantly invoking our historical achievements, our social movements, the progress that we and only we made possible because you haven't seen it anywhere else on the planet. You go to Africa and you go ahead and show me where the civil rights movement is there. They keep operating out of our playbook. These same people who come here and run us into the ground, when it comes time to pretend like they're going to take on white supremacy in South Africa, when it comes time to pretend like they're going to take on the corrupt black puppet elites in Nigeria, whose playbook do they go to? They go to ours. And then they try to talk about it as if what we did had something to do with them, while they then come over here and run us into the ground. The two cancel themselves out. Always talking about themselves as if their ancestors and their family accomplishment had something to do with ours. Well, tell me something. Can I go to the Congo and start tossing around Patrice Lumumba's name? Or worse, can I go to the Congo and have the French neo-colonialists who run that country elevate me over the native Africans and then start name-dropping Patrice Lumumba? You see, Joy Reid is of Congolese descent. She can lay claim to Patrice Lumumba, and she should. That's her history, not ours. She don't get to talk about the Freedom Riders. She doesn't get to talk about breaking the chains of Jim Crow. She don't get to talk about the brothers and sisters who were taking part in the uprisings, Red Hook Summer, the Houston Uprising, talking about the bombing of the Black Wall Streets, plural. She don't get to talk about that. That had nothing to do with her. She can talk about it as an outsider, but she better not talk about it having anything to do with her. See, I actually have respect for Patrice Lumumba. What a shame Joy Reid doesn't. You ain't never heard her go on air and go in talking about Patrice Lumumba. You ain't never seen her do that. Because she understands that her job is to be a surrogate for white supremacy in this country. Her job is to try to palm herself off as being one of us. She understands that her job is not to be questioning white supremacy. So she ain't riding for Patrice Lumumba. She doesn't want to remind anyone. She's trying to pull off the, well, I am as American as any of these Negroes who've been here for 500 years. That's what she's trying to do. Well, she may be American, but she's not a foundational black. See, a foundational black requires the bloodline, and the bloodline goes back to the plantations. And just as important, foundational black requires the bond. And that bond means that your words and your deeds are black first and always have been. Joy Reid ain't got nothing to do with that. Have you noticed that she never mentions the name of Patrice Lumumba? That would be the easiest thing for her to mention, but she doesn't because her white paymasters wouldn't like that. Her job, Joy Reid's job, is to be white power's pet angry Negro. A pretend pseudo-militant, like Ta-Nehisi Coates. There's another mealy-mouthed, fork-tongued fraud. Joy Reid gives the same empty rhetoric as a white liberal, but her skin color is, well, it's supposed to make her rhetoric a little more edgy. The goal of these black immigrants in large, not in total, not 100%, but at least 95%, let's be honest about it. 95% of them, as far as they were concerned, they were going to be the head Negroes in charge. They understood that their job was going to be to replace us. And now we're threatening that. And they're scared. They can't even confront us on it because to do so would be to openly admit to white power that they can't fool us any longer, that the majority of black people in America, the foundational blacks, the survivors of slavery, are openly hostile to the black puppets who the white media is using. Not only are we threatening the position these white media flunkies have, we're also leaving them with nowhere to turn. When white power cuts them loose, they're going to be out on their butts with nowhere to land. And this is the standard. This is what it means to impose a price for acting against the interests of foundational black America. That's what it means. This is what it means to impose a price for it. Goldie Taylor, she repeated all the feminine talking points against black men. Did white power take care of Goldie Taylor after MSNBC decided to slam the door in her face? Roly-poly soft-shoed around white power for years. Say, has white power finally rescued him from that broom closet where he does his little pretend webcam show? White power has no use for a black tool who cannot trick us into thinking that they're speaking for us. We have black people speaking very differently now, saying things that threatens white power. And these black flunkies, they're terrified to even touch it. They understand that they got to put up the appearance that they still got us fooled, that business as usual is still business as usual. But it's not. And white power's starting to look at them now and going, if you guys can't get these people in line, if you can't fool them into sitting on their hands, then, well, we'll just deal with them directly through the enforcement arm of white supremacy, but we don't need you immigrant niggers if you can't keep the domestic niggers in line. You see, we're not ready to go allying ourselves with anyone, even those brothers and sisters abroad, until we have regained our power. Once we've regained it and relearned how to wield it for our advantage, instead of everyone else's, then we can go talking about alliances with the rest of the diaspora, but not before. And by the way, there's not even going to be talk about alliances until they get their heads on straight. We're not going to have a situation where here we are going back to trying to work with black folks who have made up their minds that they're still trying to figure out if there's a comfortable spot left under white supremacy. And the foreign blacks just need to be honest about this. White supremacy had the power to curate which blacks it let into the United States. And when you look at how they behaved once they got in here, you can see that white supremacy let in the absolute worst anti-black hating fools that they could find. You see, white supremacy realized they made a horrible mistake at the turn of the 20th century with that initial group of black migrants who got in. The Marcus Garveys, the Stokely Carmichaels, the Dr. Joseph Benyakinans. They let in a bunch of pro-black true believers 100 years ago, and they brought the system to its knees. Now, these guys were the real deal. They helped to ignite the effort to show the world what a lie the U.S. is, and America's place as the so-called leader of the free world was not based on moral fortitude. We proved that there was no morality to this country, hence the U.S. has no legitimacy to tell the world anything. You can't be the leader of the free world unless you have a moral basis for doing so. And these migrant blacks who came in 100 years ago, they were dedicated to it. Now, they may not have had the bloodline, but at least ideologically, they had the bond. We showed the world how we were being treated. The world saw it and denounced the U.S. as a fraud based on how we were being treated. White power didn't have an answer for that. The reality of our deprivation was irrefutable. So they endeavored to manufacture a refutation. If you don't have a counter argument, then you got to make one up. And so that's what they did. They began using their media to fight an image war, one meant to prove that they had indeed changed. Oh, well, we know the fire hoses and the fire bombings of the churches with children inside and all the rest of it. Yeah, we know you've seen that, but we're going to prove to you that we've discovered religion where it comes to how we treat these niggers. Negroes. Coloreds. Afro-Americans. When they knew that the change was the very thing that they were fighting against, but that's not what they presented to the world. So starting in the 1960s, white power began to import a new group of black migrants to become a political counter-lever to us. But these migrants, they weren't cut from the same cloth as Marcus Garvey and Dr. Ben and Stokely Carmichael. You see, this new group, white power understood this time they had to make sure that these guys weren't gonna rock the boat. And they weren't gonna leave that to chance. This new group of black migrants being brought in the 60s, they would be rigorously interviewed and vetted in their home countries. You see, that it is true that they wanted educated blacks, but the problem that they had was they were letting in educated blacks who were trying to bring down white supremacy. This time it's a matter of, let's make sure we find educated blacks who are on our team. And not just assume it this time. Do they come from the right background? Say, were they proud of having slave owners in their family tree? Were they proud of having collaborated with the European colonialists in their country? Did they evince a certain disdainful attitude toward blacks in the United States? Or did they make it a point to coon when they were in front of us and they would go ahead and tell us how they make fun of black people in Jamaica or they make fun of black people in India or South America? Did they make it a point to do that so they would set us at ease? Come on, black folks know what white power likes to hear. When you're in front of white folks, you want to make them feel a little more secure. So you go ahead and take a couple of playful jabs at black folks to put the white power operative in front of you a little more at ease. And what you're telling them is, I'll do anything to win your favor. And that's exactly what white power wanted to make sure of. So you started seeing in the 60s a sudden influx of Africans into the school system and soon migrant blacks who were getting corporate jobs, particularly the ones of Caribbean descent, because they have Anglo names. Or in a pinch, you find some African who happens to have adopted an Anglo name. So everyone would hear a name like Joy Reid or Kamala Harris, or they'd hear a name like Steve Horsford or Anthony Brown, and they wouldn't even question if they were one of us. But then again, we also set ourselves up for a fall by declaring that it didn't matter. We opened that door, we kicked that door open, saying, well, it doesn't matter if they've traced their lineage back to slavery in the US. We're just accepting everybody. Because what we were trying to do was we were trying to pioneer black unity on a global scale. But we didn't want to accept that these other groups had ideas of their own, ones that had nothing to do with any sort of global unity or any sort of national unity or even a neighborhood unity. They were repping whatever tribe they came from. They were still doing that tribalism thing. And we have to be honest about that. Now, the only way that they'll say something differently is whenever they start to see that there's going to be punishment for it. Then all of a sudden, we had the same. Yeah, that's what they're saying now. Because we're the ones making them say it. Because we are making it clear the white power is not going to be able to use them. They won't be useful to white power anymore. So they're trying to shore up their support with us. And we're letting them know we're cutting you loose. White power gave these guys some material benefits and made sure the white media was there to run magazine articles and newspaper pieces and spots on television shows about these black people who were making it. Of course, nobody bothered to ask how many of these allegedly successful blacks there were. Besides, the U.S. has no appetite for black success. To see even one such story makes them green with envy and red with rage all at the same time. So for the white majority, seeing one piece about one Negro who has a high-level corporate job, that was enough for them. That's all they could tolerate. White people would automatically see that and say, all right, there's a Negro who works at Sears, and there's a pro football player who bought a new car, so that means black people can't say that they're being held back anymore. And isn't that what they've done? As soon as they see any story about a black person who's got two nickels to rub together, white people immediately say, that's it. You can't say that you're being held back. That's it. What they're really saying is we're tired of hearing about any instances of black success. And the white media is like, don't worry, there won't be many of them. And that was the point that the white media wanted to reach. To help white people justify saying, we are going to arbitrarily declare that black claims of inequality are invalid. We're now saying that you don't have a case anymore. Well, how do you figure that? Because we said it. That's what it was about. It was giving white people the ability to be able to stick out their chests and saying, well, we're declaring that we're not going to hear it anymore. With not that they were ever hearing it to begin with. See, it wasn't about us proving anything. It was about giving white people the anecdotal evidence that they wanted so that they could return to denying that the U.S. is oppressing us when it never stopped. So finally, white power had some positive images that they manufactured of some manufactured successful black folks making it, but no one bothered to ask if black people had a piece of the country or only had a piece of a job. Without things that we own, that we control, and that we can pass down to the next generation, we don't have anything other than gainful employment. And you only have that until the white employer decides to take it away. But nobody cared. And you had black bootlicks planted among us who the white media gave a megaphone to so they could say, well, it don't really matter. Black faces in high places, black faces in high places, black faces in high places. Oh, you know, those white folks don't like that. Well, it's not about what they don't like. It's about what we like. But white power finally manufactured some good headlines about the condition of black people in the US. International consensus calmed down a little bit, and it was in just enough places where the white media could lie and claim that these were sweeping national changes, when the truth is you only had a few cherry-picked Negroes in New York and Los Angeles, and that's it. See, this is what happens when you control vast reserves of a nation's wealth. You can turn your fiction into other people's reality. And it really helps when you can have people who look like the ones you're oppressing singing your praises, repeating your lies, and telling everyone that the U.S. is a land of opportunity. And ain't that been what these immigrant blacks have been doing nonstop? These guys have come in here and it's been a 24/7 nonstop chorus of, oh, ain't nothing wrong with America. Oh, well, you know, you got to be working for what you want, etc., etc. They will gladly repeat the white power line sounding like every other white supremacist you ever heard. That's deliberate. People who only just showed up yesterday calling themselves impersonating us, claiming our history, speaking about our past as if it was theirs, and then turning around and spitting in our faces. This was the ethno-historical fraud being perpetrated. The white media manufactured a narrative to absolve this racist country of its sins, but the lie couldn't work unless they got a few of us to go on the record and say it was the truth. And that's the reason why it was important to get a few foundational blacks to co-sign this nonsense. So, like any movie or TV show, the white media brought in some black actors to play the part of us. That's what these immigrants got brought in to do. It's a TV show. We're going to call it America Has Finally Dealt with Race. And it's going to be starring Joy Reid and Roly Poly Martin, and it's going to be starring some other suspect Negroes who you can't really track them to Alabama or Louisiana or Florida or Mississippi, but they're going to claim that the civil rights movement has something to do with them, and they're going to say our ancestors. These people showed up just 30 minutes ago, but they'll make sure to say our ancestors when talking about the destruction of the Black Wall Street, or talking about the establishment of the HBCUs, or talking about Reconstruction and Jim Crow. They'll be making sure that they steadily say our ancestors when talking about black folks in the US. These people who just showed up. This is the game that's been going on. And this does real damage to us because these are the red herrings who white society points to when they claim that no one is oppressing us. The handful of cherry-picked black migrants are somehow proof that racism is gone because white power gave a few hand-picked foreigners a higher tax bracket. So no, they cannot be allowed to claim to be us, or allowed to graft themselves onto our history, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. White power brought them in for a large agenda to prop up a lie meant to cover up a genocide being perpetrated against us. White power wronged us. But these migrants are coming in and calling themselves speaking for us and saying, well, that was in the past and we need to let it go. All of a sudden, they're going to say we need to let it go. We've had to fight white power and a largely antagonistic influx of immigrants who have run interference for white power and called themselves speaking for us as one of us. So we're cleaning house. No one speaks for us but us. And that process begins with a firm, intractable, unchanging, absolutely uncompromising definition of who we are. What constitutes us? We are not every black person who enters this country. We are not every black person who's got a hard luck story about colonialism or white oppression in their hometown, whether their hometown is New York or Kingston or Cape Town. No, I'm sorry, it's got to go deeper than that. We're a specific group with a specific history and a very specific group identity formed by that specific history. That's the reason why coming from a common experience matters. Foundational Blacks have a common bond because we came out of a common experience. We are the only true chance for the children of Africa to establish in the modern era a model of Black group economics. We're the only chance that concept has. It damn sure ain't going to be coming from these West Africans. And it damn sure ain't coming from the Caribbean. These guys are the vast majority in Jamaica and Turks and Caicos and St. Croix and all the rest of these places. And yet these guys, white power's got them living like cockroaches. How the hell are you the majority in these places and it's a matter of you ain't nationalizing and taking over? How the hell does that work? Well, it only works if you allow it to be that way. What does Black group economics mean? Malcolm told you. It means control of the economics and the politics of the areas in which we live. Africa is colonized by Europeans and now Asians. Nothing moves without their say-so, and the Africans tolerate it this way. That weakness of character is a problem that we don't need. And this also goes for the bootlicks, backstabbers, and turncoats that we have among our own ranks as foundational Blacks. Just because you came out of those plantations doesn't mean that you're part of the plan. You may have the bloodline, but do you have the bond? Ideology matters. Because without an ideology, we have no common cause, which means we have no common reason for existence. We've got no common goals. I want to draw the distinctions. We've got to have not merely a code of conduct, but enforcement of that code. We have to have a definition of what constitutes Black, and it has to be one that works to our advantage, for our interest and our benefit. And it's not a matter of whether or not it pleases everyone. People are only pleased when we're being run into the ground. So when people are unhappy about what we're doing, that lets me know that our compass points true south. Because we are a Southern-oriented people. I hope that didn't fly over anyone's head. We have to make sure that the distinction is drawn big and black. We have to make sure that the distinction is firmly enforced. Because if we as foundational Blacks deserve better than a Joy Reid or better than a Cynthia Ervio, then we also better make damn sure that we deserve better than a David Clark or a Malcolm Nance too.